Lake Bodom, a long night in Finland, and a campsite killer, an unsolved mystery. The Lake Bodom murders may well be the most famous unsolved homicide in Scandinavian criminal history, occurring in 1960 and claiming 3 victims with 1 injured survivor. It is a Finnish zeitgeist that at one time or another had the whole of Finland enraptured. It is now a buzzword for murder and mystery within this small country. They were all teenagers, just typical Finnish teenagers. The story played out like an American slasher movie, set over a decade before the slasher genre was even invented. It is a story of how a typical night of drinking, teenage love and teenage adventure turned into a blood-ridden massacre, a homicidal maniac on the rampage, or a jealous tiff turned into blood-soaked carnage. 4 young kids go camping at the nearby Lake Bodom, and only one comes back alive, severely beaten, wounded, but alive nonetheless. A little over 20 kilometers outside of Helsinki at the beautiful Lake Bodom, the Finnish teens decided to camp out for the night. It was June 4th, 1960, and the trip consisted of 2 girls accompanied by their slightly older 2 boyfriends. There was Maila Ermele Björklund, 15 years old female. She died. Anja Tuulikki Mäki, 15 years old female, also died. Seppo Antero Boisman, 18 years old male, died, and Nils Gustafsson, 18 years old male, survived. Seppo had managed to snag some alcohol and black market condoms for the night ahead in the serenity of the Finnish landscape. Their motorcycle was parked beside the tent, and they were positioned on a slight slope by the shade. At some time between 4 AM and 6 AM on the Sunday, 5th of June 1960, Mäki Björklund Boisman was stabbed and bludgeoned to death. This had occurred around the single tent which was pitched by the shore of Lake Bodom and had all 4 of the Finns sleeping inside of that night. Maila Ermele's body was found outside the tent alongside her boyfriend's wounded body, while the other 2 were found dead inside the tent. Gustafsson had managed to survive, however he suffered from a concussion, memory loss, fractures to his jaw and a stab wound across his forehead. It was Gustafsson's girlfriend, Maila Ermele, that had the most severe wounds at the time of her death, having been stabbed 15 times that night. When found, Ermele was undressed from the waist down. There were stab wounds inflicted even after she was dead. While it was clear that Anja and Seppo were murdered from within the tent and through the fabric in a less painful and less frenzied manner, Gustafsson claimed at the time to have seen a figure dressed in black and red with bright eyes appear from nowhere and viciously attack the group. Beyond that, Gustafsson was a useless and amnesiac witness who couldn't remember anything else about the night. The killer had appeared to attack the occupants with a knife from the outside and an unidentified instrument through the sides of the tent. The murderous weapon was never located. The killer also took several items from his victims, which included keys to a motorcycle, Gustafsson's shoes, and several articles of clothing. A search of the area did not locate the victims' clothing or personal items that were stolen. In the 60 years since, there have been a number of suspects identified by Finnish detectives. There was a group of birdwatchers that stumbled on the scene, but did not notice the carnage in front of them. Instead, they thought the lifeless bodies were merely sunbathing, and their attention was taken by the motorcycle before leaving the scene many hours before the police arrived. They think they may have seen a fair-haired person walking away from the tent at the time. There was also a blonde man, seen by a witness, who was fishing at the inlet further down from the scene. This man remains a mystery to this day. While not initially a suspect in the period of the 60s, the microscope went on to Gustafsson in 2004. According to prosecutors, Gustafsson had gotten drunk and after being excluded from the tent, went into a range and attacked his 3 friends from the outside, and in the ensuing fight, his jaw was then possibly broken. He then proceeded to bludgeon and stab his 3 companions to death. On October the 7th, 2005, Gustafsson was acquitted of murder and paid out a handsome compensation for the mental anguish suffered by the Finnish government and the prosecutors. The defence laid out the reasons as to why Gustafsson could not be guilty, as the injuries sustained by Gustafsson were too vast to have been involved in the killing, and he would have been incapacitated and incapable of doing so. Gustafsson was also found barefoot, while the killer's footprint was found 500 yards away from the scene. However, the FBNI, which is the Finnish equivalent to the FBI, linked DNA bloodstain analysis of the three victims to Gustafsson. It was further contended that the more severe injuries to Mæhle and Møller showed that this was as a result of an argument with Gustafsson, and that Gustafsson's girlfriend suffered the more savage killing, while Gustafsson himself suffered the least brutality, suggesting that the murders were due to a domestic fight, a crime of passion. It was always going to be difficult getting a conviction against Gustafsson given the length of time that had passed, even if he was guilty. Interestingly enough, it was the family of the victims that pushed on in the hope that Gustafsson would be found guilty. It suggests that the victims' family all held Gustafsson accountable for that event in the 1960s. A local kiosk keeper known as the Kiosk Man was heavily linked to this murder. Carl Valdemar Gillström was known to have been severely hostile towards campers. Allegedly, the Kiosk Man would throw stones at campers, cut down tents and yell verbal abuse to anybody visiting Lake Bodom. It was suggested at the time that Gillström was spotted by a witness coming back from the scene. Tragedy occurred in 1969 when Gillström drowned himself, and now the potential of gaining DNA evidence is gone. It was the cursed Lake Bodom where Gillström chose to kill himself, an ominous message perhaps. It seems apparent that Finnish investigators dropped the ball by not following up a lot of evidence to suggest that Kioskman was the campsite killer. Another suspect was Pentti Sonninen. Sonninen had committed a ton of petty crimes throughout his life and was later convicted in the 1960s. Allegedly, while in jail, Sonninen confessed to the killings. A history of drugs, alcohol, mental illness and psychotic personality, the police did not pay dividend to the confession and highlighted that Sonninen is mentally unstable and therefore an unreliable confession. Sonninen would later hang himself in a prison transport station in 1969, another suicide linked to the suspects of Lake Bodom. This is Finland, nevertheless, and suicide is unfortunately not a rarity in Finland. With a long history of antipathy between Finland and Russia, it was inevitable that a theory of Russian spies would emerge. Hans Arsman entered the surgical hospital in Helsinki on the 6th of June 1960 in a strange and dishevelled state, with black fingernails and his clothing covered in red marks, very possibly blood. Arsman was both nervous and aggressive. The clothing worn by Arsman matched the red and black description by Gustafsson, and Arsman's once longer blonde hair was suddenly cut. Living within 5 kilometers of Bodom, Arsman's clothes were said to be stained at arrival to the hospital. Arsman was a German immigrant living in Finland with links to serving to the Nazis' SS and post-war joining the Russians' KGB. Arsman was also linked to 2 other murders, both unsolved, and it could be a case of simply linking the German, Russian, Finnish spy to every unsolved homicide in Finland. Finally, there is the strange figure that appears in the photograph at the funeral and matched the description given by Gustafsson and the police sketches. A seemingly brash act of mockery to appear at the victim's funeral after engaging in such a brutal and pointless act of murder. Within those eyes could lie the truth to the case, those dead eyes of sadistic savagery. The case remains unsolved, but is a very popular case for amateur sleuths attempting to solve the case and throw around theories. Many people scour the bottoms of Lake Bodom with metal detectors in the hope of finding clues and the murder weapon, but so far nothing has been found. The case has entered the popular consciousness of Finnish culture, and there is even a rock band named Children of Bodom after the infamous case. There have been numerous movies, and there have been many songs dedicated to this dark night in Finland. And we know how much those Finns love their rock music.